just comes down to money and money and money? The purpose to do this to marginalize them?
No, I think it's more than money. I think it's as is said at the end, the system is threatened in a deep way. I mean, I don't know what, this goes back to 1970 with the Russian Revolution and perhaps before to some of the anarchist states, but some of the fear we have of the enemy, and I say the enemy is a capital E, is throughout American history. This paranoia, this, I guess, suppose it's the isolation of two seaboards or two huge oceans, but we have this amazing hysteria that builds over and over again, and it's built by the media, whether it's the Spanish-American War and Hearst, or the Russian Revolution, or after that the terrorists, or after that this and this and this and this, or drugs. It just goes on. All my life, I'm older perhaps, but since 1946, anybody who's lived this long can tell you that we're obviously under the influence of something. It's perhaps our water, I don't know. I've been told our water is dangerous. I don't know, maybe, what is McCain drinking? What are these people, do they lose their mind somewhere along the way? Do you have to lose your mind in order to be initiated into the American political structure? The level of debate, I'm not the only one who is, the level of debate is astounding, of course. It just makes me long for, civilization.
So I guess the level of lack of debate at this point, it's almost like the jingoism is the only thing that anybody seems to want to do, to try to get through anymore.
But we create enemies. And Roosevelt was with Edward Kennedy, and we're the last two, and maybe who really got through on the idea that we need not make these enemies, that we can reassess the concept of fear. I'm still hoping that Obama is making efforts. Certainly, imagine if he were not in power, McCain would be in power, and I think he would have had a heart attack by now. Guess who would be in power? So I think we're doing okay. I wish so much more, as do so many people.
Is it possible for him to break through that many things? Obviously, the country has financial issues. We have all kinds of things he has to deal with besides the bigger picture. And he seems to want to deal with the bigger picture, but they seem to be so busy trying to cut the legs out from under him. And even the left sometimes now seems to be wanting to cut the legs out.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it had been me, I would have attacked on all fronts. All fronts. I would have pulled out of Afghanistan. I would have done everything to annoy them, and they would have been shocked. So they would be fighting on 5, 10 fronts right now. You can't go into this thing halfway. You go all the way. But that's me, and I don't think I would have been elected. Because I think Howard Dean was much more capable of doing something like that. Frankly, he had the guts, and I think Obama's he always said he wanted that Afghanistan was a necessary war. So, I mean, he's done what he's done. But I think when you come on to situations like Roosevelt, didn't take prisoners, knew what he was up against, and he went strong. I think we lack that willpower because I think the media is stronger than ever, ever, ever. They can kill you. They don't need to kill John Kennedy. You can just assassinate him in the media. But I think Kennedy and Roosevelt were the last two that really tried to shake it up. And this military, like Eisenhower said in his farewell speech, and Eisenhower was quite cognizant, but he was a prisoner too of that system, was that this military-industrial complex is so rich. It's what, $700 billion this year, plus the other stuff that we're voting, plus the DEA and all the other military aspects of our culture. But let's say we have almost $1 trillion fighting force. We spend, what was it somebody said, we spend $2 billion and a half dollars on the FDA, $2.5 billion versus $700 billion. The FDA polices the water and the food poisoning, and apparently more people have died of food poisoning in this country than have from terrorist attacks.
I'm not impressed.
It's kind of crazy. I don't know where why can't we be analytical a little bit? Where's the reason? Where's the rationale? You tell me.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, do you think that the idea of a democratic internet and all of that is something that will eventually help, or are we still stuck in the mire?
No, I think it's great. I think it helps. But as Brian Perry said, the Republicans are heavy into the internet now, so they have big go. There's a lot of them out there. I mean, I'm attacked all the time. I'm sure you know that. It's been going on for 20, 30 years. I I got the early part of it, and when it got really ugly, about 1991, when JFK came out, and I couldn't believe some of the stuff they were saying. And you could float the lie and continue the lie. And that's what we became a headline culture as opposed to reading into the analysis. And when Obama tried to analyze situations, he was shouted down by the press as being not in touch.
I'd like to leave something they're going to say that I'm brainwashing children and changing history and all that stuff again. But at least it's an alternate point of view. I did it when I saw the Ken Burns series about, it was called War on PBS, and like 49 million people tuned in, and I said, well, if this is what Americans are learning about World War II, we're really fucked.
The funny thing, though, is that for all of this concern you have, in so much of your work, there seems to be a genuine, deep, and abiding love of this country that you clearly have. You're not just dissing it for the, you don't seem to be having any pleasure in smacking.
There's so many heroic Americans, and I love history. It's one of my favorites. I find heroic Americans constantly, and even today, everywhere there's great Americans. They should be celebrated. We're not doing enough of that. We got to dig them up. People like me can make people aware of some of these heroes. And there's a lot of heroes. And I think Americans are good people. I think if the majority of the Americans could vote and see things clearly, they would vote for what the decent and the right thing to do. But as they say, is this a democracy? I mean, that's a joke. It's not a democracy. It's not. It's an auction. And that's what we're doing. The best democracy in the world remains Switzerland. And the Swiss thing has worked. Think about it. The Swiss experiment has worked since the 13th century. You have to ask, why don't we ever ask ourselves, why are the Swiss, it's a smaller country, they give you all the excuses. Well, because they have cantons, they have very localized governments, they avoid the big federal government, they don't have egos in politics. You never hear about a Swiss politician, very rarely. And I think there's something to be said for lasting 800 years, even though they're not quite as multicultural as we are, but there is something, a lesson to be learned about this egomania of politics, this media need to put faces on covers and go about the Obama years, this and this. This is all screwing everything up. We have to get back to basic education levels of understanding civic